This is the image seared into our collective memory. The Great Pyramids of Giza. Built on the backs of 100,000 slaves. A monument to tyranny, forged in suffering. It's a story we all know. A story told by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus and immortalized by Hollywood. A story of human misery on an unimaginable scale. But what if that story is a lie? What if one of the most foundational tales of history, the very definition of slavery and oppression, is completely, provably wrong? For decades, archaeologists have been digging in the shadows of the pyramids. And the evidence they've unearthed doesn't just challenge the myth, it destroys it. The truth, it turns out, is hidden right beneath the sand, just meters from the tombs of the pharaohs. The case against the myth of the slaves rests on three powerful pillars of evidence. Not theories, not interpretations, but hard, physical proof. Proof of respect in death. Proof of investment in life, and proof of value in labor. This isn't the story of slaves building a tomb for their master. This is the story of a nation building a monument to their God and a staircase to eternity for themselves. This is the real story of who built the pyramids. So, where did this colossal misunderstanding come from? It begins with one man, Herodotus, the father of history. When Herodotus visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, the Great Pyramids were already ancient. They were 2,000 years old. To put that in perspective, Herodotus is closer in time to us than he was to the builders of the Great Pyramid. He was a tourist, just as we are today. He documented what his local guides and translators told him. And what they told him was a fantastic story. They worked in gangs of 100,000 men, each gang for 3 months. The time the people were tormented in this way was 10 years. 100,000 men tormented. It was a dramatic story, and it stuck. Herodotus was, after all, history's first great storyteller. But his sources were not eyewitness accounts. They were the folk tales and oral traditions of a culture 2 millennia removed from the event. It was ancient gossip. This gossip was then unintentionally reinforced by another powerful narrative, the biblical story of the Exodus. The book of Exodus tells the story of the Israelites forced into bondage, making bricks of mortar and straw. This story of Hebrew slavery in Egypt became conflated with Herodotus's tale of the pyramid builders. The two narratives merged in the public imagination, and Hollywood, starting with Cecil B. DeMille's The 10 Commandments, cemented the image. There was just one problem. The timeline is completely wrong. Most scholars place the events of the Exodus, if they occurred, around 1300 to 1200 BC. The Great Pyramids of Giza were completed by 2500 BC. That's a gap of over 1,200 years. The builders of the pyramids were not the Hebrew slaves of the Bible. They were not the cowed masses of Herodotus's folktale. So who were they? To find the answer, we must leave the realm of myth and enter the world
of archaeology. The first clue was not found in an ancient text, but by pure accident, thanks to a tourist and a horse.
The year is 1990. A tourist is riding a horse on the Giza plateau when the animal stumbles on what appears to be a low mud brick wall. The tourist reports it. Famed and famously bombastic archaeologist Dr. Zahi Hawass begins a routine excavation. He thinks it's a minor tomb, perhaps for a low-level official. He is unprepared for what he finds. It is not a single tomb, it is a cemetery, a vast, sprawling necropolis packed with over 600 tombs. And as they dig deeper, they find thousands more. But these are not the tombs of royalty or high-ranking nobles. The inscriptions, the simple goods, the skeletons themselves all point to one conclusion. This is the cemetery of the pyramid builders.
This discovery right here is the first pillar of our evidence, respect. And the first clue is the location. This cemetery is located right next to the pyramids. In ancient Egypt, proximity to the pharaoh's tomb was a measure of one's status. To be buried near your king was one of the highest honors imaginable, a sign that you would join him in the afterlife. Think about it. If you are a tyrant and you have just worked 100,000 slaves to death, what do you do with the bodies? You don't honor them. You don't give them prime real estate next to your own divine monument. You dump them in a mass grave far out in the desert to be forgotten. But these workers were not forgotten. They were honored.
The second clue is what was inside the tombs. The workers were buried in the traditional fetal position, facing east towards the rising sun and the new day. They were buried with grave goods, jars that once held beer and bread, tools of their trade like chisels and hammers. These were supplies for the duat, the Egyptian afterlife. Slaves are property. They are not considered to have an afterlife. They are certainly not provisioned for one. These men and women were buried as respected Egyptians, fully expecting to join their gods. The final and most touching clue is the design of the tombs themselves. Many of the workers built their houses of eternity as miniature pyramids or mastabas, mimicking the very structures they were building for their king. This isn't the act of a resentful slave. This is an act of aspiration, of piety, of pride. Dr. Hawass was clear. This was, as he called it, the tombs of the artisans. The men who built the pyramids were not slaves. They were Egyptians. The implications of this one discovery are staggering. It changes everything, and it's only the first piece of the puzzle. We are just getting started, and the next piece of evidence, what they ate, is even more shocking. If you believe history needs to be told accurately, and you enjoy having long-held myths shattered by evidence, please consider subscribing to our channel. Click that bell icon so you don't miss the rest of this investigation as we uncover the lost city of the builders.
This is Heit el-Ghurab. For decades, it was known simply as the workers' camp. But thanks to the meticulous work of archaeologist Dr. Lehner and his team at ERA, Ancient Egypt Research Associates, we now know this was no mere camp. This was a city, a planned, sprawling, highly organized metropolis built for one purpose: to house and feed the workforce building the pyramids. Lehner's team didn't just find huts. They found an infrastructure so sophisticated it borders on the industrial. They uncovered what they call the galleries. These are not slave pens. They are long, standardized barracks, clearly designed for a large, rotating body of men. Lehner's calculations show they could house 1,600 to 2,000 workers at a time. This suggests a rotating, conscripted workforce, not a permanent slave population. They found copper-working shops, bakeries, and granaries, all operating on a massive scale. And then they found the kitchens, and this is where the slave myth truly begins to crumble. This is our second pillar, investment.
In a section of the city, Lehner's team uncovered a massive dumping ground for the city's kitchens. It was a treasure trove of ancient bones. Dr. Richard Redding, the lead zooarchaeologist for the AERA team, began to analyze these bones. What he found was staggering.
He found that the workers were consuming, on average, over 4,000 pounds of meat every single day. Let that sink in. 4,000 pounds. And this was not scraps. This was not the gristle and bone given to dogs. The analysis of the cut marks, the ages of the animals, all pointed to one conclusion. The pyramid builders were eating prime beef. They were eating young cattle, slaughtered in their prime. They were eating vast quantities of sheep and goat. This was a high-status, high-protein diet. You don't feed a slave population prime beef. You just don't. This is the diet of a valued, skilled workforce, a diet you would feed to soldiers or to the elite.
The logistics are mind-boggling. To supply this city, a fleet of boats would have sailed up and down the Nile, bringing grain from the delta and herds of cattle from rural estates. This was a state-run project on a national scale. You do not make this kind of massive, expensive logistical investment in a workforce you consider disposable. You don't feed slaves like kings. You do it because this workforce is your greatest asset. You are investing in their strength, their health, and their ability to perform one of the most demanding jobs in human history. The tombs showed us how they were respected in death. The city kitchens show us how they were invested in during life. But it's the skeletons themselves that give us the third and final pillar, the proof of their value.
The bones of the pyramid builders tell two stories. The first story is the one we expect. It is a story of brutal, back-breaking labor.
The skeletons show evidence of extreme physical stress. We see massive spinal trauma, fused vertebrae, advanced arthritis in men who were only in their 30s. We see limbs crushed by heavy stones. The work was relentless. It was dangerous. It shortened their lives. But the bones tell a second story, a story that is utterly astonishing, and it forms our third pillar, value.
The archaeologists found numerous skeletons with perfectly healed fractures, legs, arms, and hands that had been broken but were then set in splints. These workers didn't just recover, they were treated. And they recovered so well that they often returned to work, as the bones show signs of new stress after the break. They even found evidence of brain surgery, skulls showing successful trepanation, a procedure where a hole is cut in the skull. The healed bone around the edges proves the patient survived the operation, perhaps for years. This is, without question, the most powerful evidence against the slave myth. Think about it from the cold, pragmatic perspective of a slave owner. If a slave breaks their leg, you do not pay for a doctor. You do not waste resources setting the bone, feeding the man for months while he heals. You do not provide advanced medical care. You replace him. He is a disposable asset. But these workers were not disposable. They were treated. They were given access to the most advanced medical care of their age. They were valued. They were indispensable.
So, if they weren't slaves, who were they? The final clue comes from the pyramids themselves, in hidden chambers, in places no one was ever meant to see. The workers left graffiti. And this graffiti reveals the names of their teams, names full of bravado and pride. The friends of Khufu, the followers of the powerful white crown of Khufu, and a name that shows their humor, the drunkards of Menkaure. These are not the markings of oppressed slaves, toiling in fear. This is the graffiti of proud work crews, of teams engaged in friendly competition, of men who knew they were part of something monumental. The picture is now clear. The workforce was likely a combination of two groups: a core of permanent, highly skilled artisans and engineers, the men who designed the tombs and oversaw the work, and a much larger, rotating workforce of around 20,000 men conscripted from villages up and down the Nile. This was the corvée system. These men would come to Giza, serve for a few months, and then return home, replaced by a new crew. This was not slavery. This was a national project. It was a form of taxation, paid not in money, but in labor. And why did they do it?
Because to them, the pharaoh was not just a king, he was a god on earth, the living embodiment of the god Horus. Building his pyramid was not just a construction job, it was a sacred duty. It was an act of faith. By building the pharaoh's stairway to heaven, they were ensuring the stability of the entire cosmos. They were guaranteeing the flow of the Nile, the rising of the sun. And in doing so, they were also securing their own small place in eternity, in the shadow of their God-King. The myth of the slaves is dead. It was born from ancient gossip and fueled by cinematic fantasy. The truth, written in stone and bone, is far more compelling. Let us review the evidence. The Hollywood image shows us beaten, disposable slaves. The tombs show us they were respected in death, buried with honor next to their kings. The Hollywood image shows us a starving, wretched workforce. The kitchens show us they were invested in, fed a high-protein diet fit for elites. The Hollywood image shows us men who were worked until they broke, then discarded. The skeletons show us they were valued, given advanced medical care to heal their wounds. The Great Pyramids are not monuments to oppression. They are monuments to human ingenuity, to social organization, and to the power of a shared faith. They were built by skilled workers, by proud Egyptians, by men who ate like kings, were treated by doctors, and were buried with honor. The next time you look at these ancient wonders, don't see the imaginary lash of a whip. See the real hands of the friends of Khufu, a nation of believers working together to build eternity.
But now we want to hear from you. Which of these 3 pillars of evidence do you find the most powerful? the honored tombs, the high-protein diet, or the advanced medical care? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Your engagement helps this history reach more people.